All right. So I am live, everyone, across social media. So I'm going to come on the camera in a moment. I hope all is well with everyone. Happy, what day is this? Tuesday, right? I think we're on Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, everyone. So let me go ahead and come online. All right. So, hello, everyone. Hello, hello. It's your girl, Cesare, aka the Pretty Producer, aka the Singing Scholar, coming to you with a live video. Of course, if you're not able to make it during this time, I know it's like an awkward time of the day here in the US, but you can always catch the replay. So, I wanted to come on just to share like a brief encouragement hour. So I'm not going to stay on for a whole hour, but this is like the encouragement space or time. And I wanted to talk specifically about a subject. I hope that this subject will bless you. I hope that this subject will give you some encouragement because many of us, including myself, I believe we're experiencing this particular topic. And so I'll get straight to the point. The topic that I wanted to talk about today was transition. So, going through transitions. So, what are transitions? They're usually like just major life changes, things that you're experiencing, maybe you've never experienced before, or maybe you're coming around a certain mountain again and you're seeing some similar things that will require, maybe some sacrifice, some realignment, some relocating, whatever that looks like for you. And so I wanted to just share my thoughts on it and also just from a personal perspective as well, more so like a personal testimony. And I have learned that there's some things that I was speaking of like last year and I'm still carrying them into this year to speak about those things. So the first thing I believe when it comes to like a certain transitional phase in your life is to just be reminded to go with small steps and also to go with big steps, small steps and big steps. And so, personally, I'm finding that you will toggle between the two. There'll be times when you're taking small steps towards a certain direction, and then there are other times where transition requires you to take those bigger steps. And let's start out with the small steps. Some people, especially with the influence of social media, the influence of maybe someone else's grandiose talk of life, they'll think that small steps are irrelevant, or they'll think that everything has to happen overnight, or everything just, it's like when people edit videos and then you see like some of these shorts, for example, they will make it seem like, oh, everything just happens automatically. And so I've come to remind you that that is definitely not true. And so, just to be encouraged about the beauty of the small steps, when you're taking your time to do things and you're taking it step by step, it really helps you to enjoy the process. If your mindset is locked in that way, you have to enjoy the process of small steps. Small steps are beautiful because they also show and display growth. They display also maturity. And when you're taking things on a smaller scale, like small steps through life transitions, that also will help you sometimes to really look a little closely to see if there's something you need to correct or something that needs to be patched up or changed during that particular process. So again, life transitions can look very different for everyone. But whatever that is to you personally, I just want you to think about that today as I like I said, speak from some personal perspectives about transition. And so, with the bigger steps, sometimes it's going to cost you a leap of faith, taking a risk, sometimes doing something that other people are not pleased with, right? The last time I've checked, especially from a personal perspective, some of you may know me, personally, you may have met me online or in passing or something like that. And I'm known to a lot of people as a risk taker. And so, when it comes to risks, certain types of risks, they are good because, again, when you are sometimes going through a certain type of transition in life, if you do not make a big leap or a big step, you will be stagnated and you will be stuck. So you have to know the differences in the time frames. And so I point this back again to the example of social media. So again, with these shorts and different things like that, they'll like fast forward all the steps. They'll, make it seem like everything just happens glamorously in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. And so we know really, the real deal is life is not like that. So even though you may know that, I still want you to be aware that sometimes seeing a lot of these false manufactured successes of things, they're not going to work. And so sometimes you may think that you're ignoring it or you think you're pushing it to the side, but it still affects you subconsciously. And you're not going to realize about, again, enjoying the small steps and even knowing the difference, like I said, when to take the big steps. So that's really one of the main things concerning transition. The other thing that I thought about from last year and even into this year was to do it scared. You have to do some things scared. A lot of people, even including myself, I've hurt myself in the past. We'll talk about things like we want to make sure this is right. We want to make sure this is in order. You want to dot all of your I's. You want to cross all of your T's. And while in some cases that is basically, a good thing, in some cases, it's not always going to work that way. So if we're waiting for the perfect moment to do certain things, I've come to tell you to bust your bubble, it's not going to happen that way. So sometimes we have to be in that mindset. Even if you're nervous, do it scared. One of my personal examples about doing something scared was I remember that some years ago, I moved from New York City and I moved to Chicago. And I moved within 5 months after just visiting Chicago for 7 days. And was that a scary experience? Oh, very much so. Not something that you typically hear about. Everything I knew was in New York City, but just visiting Chicago for 7 days and then doing a lot of, just the contemplating. I had to pray about it, all kinds of things. And so then I tell you, 5 months later, I was in a new city. So I'm not saying that you need to jump into a new city as a life transition, but maybe some of you do, But I'm sharing my example for a reason where I was scared and I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly what was lined up. I'll tell you this, when I moved from New York, I didn't have a job. I didn't have an apartment. I didn't have those basic things that would be typically laid out. Again, I'm not asking everyone to replicate my life story or anything like that, but I'm just saying that in some cases you have to do some things scared because as you're doing it, the boldness that you'll develop over time by taking the steps, being able to shut out the naysayers or being able to shut out the doubters. So that's another thing about where you want to make sure that you feeling scared is in the right place. And what do I mean by being in the right place? Because sometimes when people do things out of fear, and you're doing things out of pressure, that's a whole different story. So when it comes to also transitions, I noticed that again, we're living in a world where everybody has a lot of opinions, and a lot of people will tell you that, well, you should do it this way, or maybe they'll say something like, well, it didn't work out for me. And so that's what I mean by sometimes be mindful. Don't do things out of fear or don't shut down out of fear because you cannot have your story to replicate someone else's. All of our stories are not going to be the same. All of our outcomes are not going to be the same. But a lot of times, what we can do is we can celebrate one another's outcomes and also different time zones. What I mean by time zones, I'm not talking about like time zones as far as geographical, but as far as like if you have a certain time that you're going to experience a certain outcome, be patient with that. Be happy with your own timeline. Everybody has transitions that will cease at different times. We all will not experience the same thing at the same time. And so I hope that that encourages you to see your own personal transition from a different perspective where pace yourself and know that when you have to take a leap of faith, when you have to take a chance, when you have to sometimes sit back. So, a lot of the times, too, sometimes we might be obsessed when we hear about transitions to say, oh, we just got to take a leap of faith, just got to go, we got to go and do it. But then there's this other side where it's patience. And there are times when you have to just stop, slow down, and so we don't talk about that a lot. Why? Because again, social media, the different, we're living in a fast paced world right now. So everybody wants this right now and quick, quick, quick. And so sometimes you have to be aware again during your own transition. When is that time to be patient? When is it that time to stop and revisit some things? Maybe you need to redo some things. Maybe you need to unlearn some things. I always emphasize a lot of times about the term unlearning because I'm going to be very honest with you all. And again, I'm not here to try to convince people to agree with me. I'm speaking from my own perspective and my own lifestyle. I find that a lot of people are tossed to and fro with different theories, isms, thoughts, manifestation of thoughts, and just all kinds of things where a lot of people are lost because they're trying to delve into so many different types of ideas and advice and listening to this counsel and listening to this trend and all these things. And so, if you don't really have some sort of solid understanding of what you're focusing on, you cannot expect to transition with a victorious mindset. Because sometimes when it comes to transition, you have to keep what I like to call a narrow mindset. There are people out here that overuse, or I would say misuse the term, how can I put it? They'll use the term, being open minded. And there's nothing wrong with being open minded to some extent. But when you're so open to the point where you don't know when to close your mind to really stay focused on the thing, this is where we get lost. And a lot of times you're not going to hear that from people because they're just listening to so many voices. And so sometimes you have to really get down and really close your mind to a lot of things, a lot of voices, even songs, and just different platforms of influences. I noticed that lately too. There's this high rise of podcasts. I'm not against people who do podcasts, apparently, because I'm doing the podcast myself, right? I'm not against it. But what I would forewarn you to do is just because someone comes out with something doesn't mean you have to listen to it, doesn't mean you have to receive the advice. Because again, when you're going through some sort of transition in life, a lot of transition really breeds, I'll say, uncertainty, right? Sometimes when we're in our transitions of change, we're uncertain about which direction to go. And so when you have all these different things that are coming at you, different types of advice, you're going to get confused. So that's just real talk. So that's why I said that, it's no disrespect to those that talk about a lot of topics and they have a different perspective on things. You can hear things out of respect, but like I said, during this whole phase of transition, if you're changing, you want to be mindful of what you're listening to while you're going through the change, if that makes sense. The next thing that I thought about concerning transition is ask questions. So sometimes we might get into a mode of thinking like we're all on our own. Oh, nobody else understands what we're going through. You'd be surprised, a lot of people do understand what we're going through because we all experience transitions on different levels. So even though I said earlier that we may not all have the same outcomes concerning our transition, it doesn't mean that we don't experience the same type of things. So sometimes you might need an extra pair of eyes, right, to help you to see something. You might need an extra pair of ears because maybe there was something you didn't hear before, but you need to hear it again. So don't despise, in other words, asking questions. Don't despise help during your times of transition. I know that it's hard to people. A lot of people say it's hard to trust people. I get that. It's not easy to trust people, but I do want to encourage you all out there that there's still people that have good character. There's still people who are trustworthy. Even if you find one person, it's worth it. So you still want to make sure that you have some sort of accountability somewhere around you, even if it's like a pen pal. Because I know that a lot of people they may feel like, oh, I don't have anyone in my immediate, circle or space, and maybe there's someone from a distance or from afar that might have some common ground with you. You just never know. So I would just say be open to how you may connect with people or asking those questions. Another thing I would say during transition, this is kind of like the opposite of asking questions. It's actually cut people off. So, those of you who know me, I'm really not a big fan of like promoting, this whole thing about cut everybody off. Don't talk to this person. Don't do this and don't do that. However, there are occasions where we do have to cut people off. That's just a fact, especially if they're coming from the past and they're not really attributing or contributing to your future. So, when it comes to cutting some people off, this can be very touchy for a lot of people. The I feel like the world we live in today, the way people are trying to deal with problems as far as confrontation, a lot of people not good with confronting people about things or talking about hard truth and things like that. But I would encourage you to challenge yourself to do that. In some cases when you're cutting people off, it would be a silent closure. And there's nothing wrong with that as well. But the reason why I mentioned about cutting certain people off because at the end of the day, depending on where you're going, literally, and I know we've heard this 1,000 times, but people are not always going to be able to go with you. And sometimes we just need to hear it again and again and again. We don't hear something once and we're not going to necessarily ace it that moment when we hear it. So it's really about repetition, being reminded, and knowing like sometimes when you're cutting people off, I will say this, it's not a bad thing. It's not to really take personal. I know that some people they take this stuff personal when you cut them off, but if people really knew, like if you really cared for them a certain way, sometimes they'll understand that we can care for people enough to let them go because sometimes they have a transition to go through. And even with cutting some people off, this is not for all, but when you cut people off during a certain time during transition, maybe you both or you all may come back together at a certain point in time in life. It just depends on the phase, it depends on what's going on. But I say that as a broad example for a reason because, again, however you perceive your life right now as a personal transition, that's going to resonate with you to some extent, or maybe it won't resonate with you. So I hope that makes sense. And then um, one thing that I learned last year for sure was that there's a cost for the new version of you. So we probably have heard that before as well. But I think there's a big difference between hearing something and actually experiencing it. So when we realize that there's a cost, what does this cost look like? I'm just going to speak generally speaking. When you are developing a new version of yourself, it has a lot to do with sacrifice, where you're letting sometimes old habits go. You're recognizing that there's some things you're no longer interested in. You're recognizing that maybe you are gaining some new interest in some things. And then you're probably recognizing that maybe some of your friendships or relationships are changing around you. So when you start seeing some of these differences, realize that these all involve some sort of cost. And also, too, when you see people, you know how you might see a before and after picture of someone. Let's take exercise for example. You see the beauty of the physical, right? But you won't realize that there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of hurt, there was probably some injury sometimes, or some up and downs when it comes to gaining weight, or whatever the case is between that transition. So we don't see all of that. Everyone wants to show like the glamorous side of things. So it's the same thing, as I mentioned, where whatever this new version of yourself you would like to see even coming into this year, do understand it comes with a lot of that sacrifice. And I will also emphasize to this, to you all, when you go through certain types of sacrifices, ups and downs, you may think you try to hit on a nail to achieve something and then you fail temporarily. Those things, they don't have to be announced. They really don't have to be announced. Again, if you find like you have a certain type of tribe, or people that you can confide in them, or sometimes again to keep a lot of that stuff private, because your private tears, your private sufferings, your private doubts, because we all have those type of things in private a lot of the times. Those things can remain private, but understand they're not your end story. So I want to encourage you today to know that that's not your end story. Again, we are around a lot of voices in this day and age. So whatever you hear will also affect how you transition, how smooth your transition will be, how successful your transition is going to be. Again, just to list some examples, transition could be anything from career, it could be anything from relationships, it could be anything from you overcoming some sort of traumatic experience. It could be you coming out of one environment into a totally new environment. So you see how transition can look different for everyone. So that's why I said make it personal of how you see it. Another thing, I think this is like the final thing I'll probably say regarding transition is just understand too that it's okay to outgrow people, outgrow the interests, because sometimes when you move on and you change, people will begin to condone that or they begin to try to criticize it, or they'll try to say, oh, well, you think you're a certain way, or you think we don't matter anymore. And quite frankly, maybe they don't matter. I'm just being honest, because when you're focused on going upward and you're focused on becoming better, again, there will be some people that can come up with you, and then there are other people, they have to stay on the sideline. So when they have to stay on the sideline, it still does not give us the permission. And again, I know that I can't stop this happening in the world, but I'm going to tell you personally, don't bash people's character down just because they can't come up with you. I see this all the time online. It's terrible. And even in person, people, they'll talk about, oh, well, I'm better than this person. I told you I was going to do this and look at you now. And, honestly, that's not humility. And if you expect to have this, like, I would say, perpetual victory after you transition from any type of life transition, be nice, be humble. It pays to do that more than anything else. I know that sometimes we want to prove our point. I get that because we all have it in us, right? That's just a natural, struggle. We want to tell people off, right? Or we want to show people like this is what I have or this is what this is and I told you I was right. But I'm telling you that is not the attitude if you expect to remain afloat after your transition. So, that is it for this particular Speak Life. So I wanted to again just come on to encourage you if you're going through some sort of life transition. Hopefully, some of these tips, some of these things I've shared will be able to bless you through it. Know that today will be different from tomorrow. Today is different from last year. So I would even encourage you to take it one day at a time. I know it's easier said than done, but you'd be surprised that if you really, really think about things from a certain perspective, think about the beauty of the process when you're going through a transition. Think about the fact that you will see the reward if you really stay on track with this transition, whatever that looks like in your life, that you will make it. So once again, this is your girl Cesare, aka the pretty producer, aka the singing scholar. So I thank you all for joining me during this particular time. And of course, if you want to inbox me on these different sites, I'm trying to be a little more responsible as I just came back online. So some of you may not know I just came back online 10 days ago. So please bear with me as I'm trying to stay connected to everyone. But have a great day, night, afternoon, no matter where you are in the world. And I'll be back on at another time. Okay.